the zero tolerance is doing is it's creating incredible fear.
Fortunately or unfortunately, Nisour Square was a big turning point for private security companies here.
There's no secret. I mean, we need China, no question.
The CEO of Audi has been arrested over concerns he might tamper with an investigation that came out of Volkswagen's diesel scandal. Rupert Stadler is the most senior executive to be arrested since the carmaker admitted to rigging its emissions tests in 2015. The World Health Organization is recognizing gaming addiction as a mental health condition. Gaming disorder will be added to the International Classification of Diseases, which could mean doctors will be able to treat it directly, without tying their problem to anxiety or other conditions. Hundreds marching across Afghanistan have reached the capital after walking for more than a month across their war-torn country while fasting for Ramadan. The peace movement began with just 8 activists who held a hunger strike after a car bomb killed 14 people in March.
We are going to have the Air Force and we are going to have the Space Force, separate but equal.
President Trump directed the Pentagon to establish a 6th branch of the U.S. Armed Forces called the Space Force. The name was coined 3 months ago by this man.
You know, I was saying it the other day because we're doing a tremendous amount of work in space. I said, maybe we need a new force. We'll call it the Space Force. And I was not really serious. And then I said, what a great idea. Maybe we'll have to do that.
The images of young migrants kept in pens on American soil would be enough to make most politicians think twice about their approach to immigration. But President Trump is digging in.
The United States will not be a migrant camp, and it will not be a refugee holding facility. It won't be. You look at what's happening in Europe, you look at what's happening in other places, we can't allow that to happen to the United States, not on my watch.
Predictably, that show of defiance just made the administration's problem worse. And a little after 5 p.m., they trotted out the Secretary of Homeland Security to put a more compassionate spin on the issue.
So I want to provide you an update on the illegal immigration crisis on our southern border.
The so-called zero-tolerance policy is supposed to apply to people who cross the border illegally. But one of the questions Secretary Nielsen got was how it's affecting people who cross legally, by asking for asylum at an official port of entry.
DHS is not separating families legitimately seeking asylum at ports of entry.
That late-in-the-day cleanup attempt by Secretary Nielsen indicates the administration is hearing the same reports that I am here in El Paso, that zero tolerance is intersecting with the asylum system, which is supposed to be separate. Asylum seekers are doing what the Trump administration asked them to do, presenting themselves at a port of entry and claiming a credible fear of returning to their home country. Customs and Border Protection isn't officially denying asylum seekers entry to the U.S., but they are telling people that the detention centers where asylum seekers are being held while their claims are processed are full. According to aid workers, people can spend days waiting to make an asylum claim, and in some cases, adults accompanying minors making an asylum claim can even be charged with a crime.
One of the great concerns now is that we are beginning to hear reports of some families who crossed through the port of entry that were separated and prosecuted criminally. And that's of tremendous concern to us because it's now no longer individuals who cross illegally, but now even individuals that present at a port of entry. And so this is something that we want to follow very, very carefully.
What you're saying happened in this case was somebody did what they were supposed to do in terms of presenting themselves at a port of entry with an asylum claim. At some point, somehow, this person was charged criminally and separated from her child.
Correct.
And the charge was illegal entry.
Correct.
Customs and Border Protection referred us to Secretary Nielsen's remarks today. But even before the families are allowed to make their asylum claim, Garcia says some have run into problems. On Friday, Garcia helped 5 families make asylum claims, but he says 2 were turned away and joined a growing group of asylum seekers crowding the port of entry. Can you walk me through, again, this these are signs that you all are helping folks make.
Correct. For people that are trying to present at a port of entry to establish the categorical claim, I am afraid and I'm asking for asylum. So there can be no question on the part of a CBP officer that in fact is what they're facing in the person of this mom with her children or this dad with his children.
And the kind of things you're saying is where you're from, that what your name is, what your child's name is, and your reason, essentially.
Correct. Why it is that I'm here. Even if the sign isn't helpful, what we're trying to do is document the fact that even individuals that clearly, categorically have expressed fear and are asking for asylum are being turned away, even though CBP officers will say, we're not denying. In effect, when you go to the international line and you ask for asylum, if you are turned away, you have been turned down. Okay? And I think that needs to be clear.
And is that legal?
It is not legal. Our understanding, according to the law, is that when an individual presents at the boundary line and they ask for asylum, they express fear and ask for asylum, that CBP is then obligated to process them and to place them in the immigration process whereby that asylum claim can be evaluated and adjudicated.
What do the officers say, at least in your experience?
Well, it's a pretty consistent message, and it's a very interesting message. Officers will say, we don't have space. Our processing facility at the port, we're full, we don't have space. And then there's the use of the word humane. And they're very good about saying we are not denying anyone the opportunity. We're just saying not now.
Are you seeing more people trying to seek asylum since the zero tolerance policy came into effect?
No, its enforcement hasn't really had that big of an impact on why people are leaving El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and what it is that they speak about when they arrive. What the zero tolerance is doing is it's creating incredible fear because for them, the issue is they want to take my children away.
The Department of Homeland Security told Vice News today that in just the last month or so, May 5th to June 9th, they separated 2,342 minors from their parents. That's a pretty sobering number, and it has a lot of opponents of the policy wondering how on earth this could be happening. President Trump is blaming the Democrats.
And I say it's very strongly the Democrats' fault.
The Department of Homeland Security says it's just following protocol.
Illegal actions have and must have consequences.
The Justice Department says it's just enforcing American law.
We do have a policy of prosecuting adults who flout our laws to come here illegally.
Sessions and the DOJ legally can do this, and they would say they're required to. But Sessions' remarks downplay the role the administration has in creating this separation policy in the first place. The administration's zero-tolerance policy means that basically everyone who is caught crossing the border illegally is being charged with a crime. This is different than how the Obama or Bush administrations handled this. I asked Wendy Young, who runs a pro-immigrant organization that tries to help undocumented kids get legal representation, to explain what changed.
Because unaccompanied children go on a different legal track, this is why they're going to HHS and being placed into deportation proceedings separately from the parent in many cases. Deportation proceedings are a civil proceeding, they're not a criminal proceeding. And in the past, very few families would be put on the criminal track and prosecuted for illegal entry. It would be the exception to the norm in the sense that perhaps it was somebody who had unlawfully entered a few times.
Or had an actual criminal background.
Yes, exactly, had a criminal offense. Now we're seeing that they're using the laws on the books inappropriately in order to punish families who arrive here and to deter others who may be thinking about making the voyage to the United States.
Whether that is an inappropriate use of laws is up for debate. But because of how this administration is interpreting the law, since minors can't go to adult jail, they're separated from their parents. Sessions also spoke today about loopholes in the immigration system.
We do not want to separate parents from their children. You can be sure of that. If we build a wall, we pass some legislation, we close some loopholes, we won't face these terrible choices.
One of the loopholes they're talking about is the leniency previous administrations showed to families who cross the border illegally, like keeping them together and not having their cases be decided in the criminal court system. This current administration does not want to encourage immigration in general, and they've decided to use our laws to try to deter people. What is wrong with that?
President Trump's loopholes are what we call child protections. These laws have been built up over 15 years specifically out of recognition that children are uniquely vulnerable. It doesn't matter where they are born, they share certain characteristics that make them vulnerable. He's using the term loopholes because it plays well to certain people in the country who believe that our immigration laws are too loose. This is one area of our immigration law that works actually fairly well until this administration came along.
The Supreme Court today avoided sweeping rulings on two closely watched partisan gerrymandering cases, but mostly for technical reasons. In one case, Gill versus Whitford, 12 Wisconsin Democrats argued that their collective influence in the state assembly was weakened by new Republican-drawn districts. But the justices said voting is an individual activity, so in order to sue, plaintiffs have to demonstrate that any political damage from gerrymandering affected individual votes. If the plaintiffs reframe their argument, they can continue the case. In a second, similar case, Benesek versus Lamone, a group of Republican voters challenged changes that Democrats made to Maryland's congressional maps. The court also chose not to rule on whether the Maryland map was constitutional, instead leaving that for a lower court to decide in a full trial. Until that happens, the gerrymandered maps stay in place through the midterm elections in November. What everyone was watching for was whether the justices would take a definitive stand on partisan gerrymandering, especially since maps will be redrawn again after the 2020 census. So without a ruling on the actual legal merits of whether political parties can redraw districts to gain advantage, it's still not clear what's constitutional or what's not when it comes to redistricting. In Baghdad in 2007, mercenaries from Blackwater International committed one of the war's most notorious atrocities, killing more than a dozen innocent Iraqis. It became known as the Nisour Square Massacre. Blackwater argued that the men were just doing their jobs and claimed they had cause to believe they might be under attack. But in 2014, 4 Blackwater security guards were found to have fired without provocation. The next year, 3 were sentenced on manslaughter and firearms offenses in federal court. And one, Nicholas Slatten, who was accused of firing first, got life in prison for murder. Late last year, though, the D.C. Circuit ordered that Slatten was entitled to a retrial. Jury selection for that trial begins today.
عجلة هنايا والأربع عجلات هنا جت الأمريكية مال شركة بلاك ووتر قاطع السير رمت 3 طلقات إلى 4 طلقات أبو الشركة.
أنت موجود؟
أي موجود.
Ali Khalaf was a traffic policeman on duty in this square when a team of American private contractors escorting a US embassy convoy in Baghdad got stuck in traffic, panicked, and started spraying civilian cars with heavy machine gun fire and grenades, killing 17 Iraqi civilians.
طلقة أنا من كنت واقفة هنا طلقة من ناية.
That's from Blackwater?
Blackwater. هاي الطلقات علي همينة. هاي هذا شوفه هذا كله Blackwater.
All of it?
كله Blackwater.
A young doctor driving his mother in this white Kia took the first bullets.
هي صيح ولدي بعدين الدكتور دا سحبه.
أي.
رموا على أمه طلقتين كتلوها 3 طلقات كتلوها.
The incident highlighted the excesses and impunity of an industry that had massively expanded over a short period of time. In 2007, there were up to 180,000 private contractors in Iraq, more than the number of US troops on the ground. The Nissil Square shooting made Blackwater a notorious name and a global liability.
Folks like Blackwater, who provide security for the State Department, are under rules of engagement. In other words, they have certain rules, and this commission will determine whether or not they violated those rules.
Fortunately or unfortunately, Nissil Square was a big turning point for private security companies here that just caused a lot of people to look at their procedures and what they were doing from an industry standard.
Since the incident, there's been a more than 90% reduction in the number of foreign contractors in Iraq.
You know, the days...
Jim Reese is one of the few Americans left.
Some people would call it the Wild West days. Those days are long gone.
His company, Tiger Swan, is paid to provide armed escorts and facility protection for businesses, reporters, and NGOs in Iraq. But the firm now mostly relies on local staff to do it.
If you have all these armored vehicles and a bunch of, Westerners standing there, all kitted up in their tattoos and everything, just boom, it's a big spotlight. You don't want people that are trigger happy. You don't want people who, they join this stuff to be commandos, not the type of person you're looking for.
After Blackwater, Iraq's government enacted regulations that made it harder for foreign security companies to operate. For example, they must now pay an advance bond of $800,000 cash as a deposit against wrongdoing. But lawyers for relatives of those killed in the Nissil Square shooting say that hasn't addressed the real problem. Susan Burke filed the initial lawsuit that led to the prosecutions.
From my perspective, there has not been a real reckoning with Nissil, nor, I would note, have we as a nation actually stepped up to the task of saying, okay, we are going to use private security, we are going to use mercenaries, let's regulate that industry.
I mean, after that incident, the Iraqi government came up with all sorts of restrictions and rules that totally changed the landscape for private security companies to operate there. So isn't that a solution to the problem?
Well, it's certainly a solution for Iraq, but really the question for our population and for us as Americans is, what's our obligation? What should we be doing? I applaud and I admire the prosecutors who are handling the Blackwater case. It's just that there are many, many other cases as well that should be prosecuted.
Families of the Nissil Square victims have heard they may need to testify once again. Most are finding it hard to understand why the case has been reopened.
هاي جريمة قتل، هاي مو حادثة، جريمة قتل.
Hussein Sahib watched his brother Mehdi die of gunshot wounds to his chest.
القاضي قلت لك شو عليه، يعني شلون تعاطف وياهم وطلعهم. ذولا مجرمين ذولا أكثر من جريمة سووا. بس شلون تعاطف وياهم وطلعهم. والله ما أعرف واحد.
China imports more recyclable goods than any other country. But earlier this year, China stopped accepting a long list of imported plastic and paper waste and implemented much stricter guidelines for what it was willing to take in. That dramatic shift in policy is coming out of a national campaign to reduce the country's carbon footprint. But it's also a signal that China won't settle for being the trash collector for the rest of the world.
We're going to go to our single-stream recycling facility, which has been the most impacted by the waste bans in China.
And that's over on the far end?
It is on the far end, yep.
All right, let's go.
Okay.
BJ Harvey's family has been in the garbage business for more than a century. They sort recyclables, squeeze them into cubes, and then, under normal circumstances, sell them to companies that turn the paper and plastic into all kinds of industrial products.
What percentage of the stuff that is processed here ends up going overseas?
Probably half of the recycling that we do.
And what percentage of that goes to China?
Oh, it was probably like 90. Yeah.
Typically, there might be a few dozen one-ton cubes sitting around. But now, Harvey's got thousands of them.
We usually have inventory that sits for a couple days and then moves out. This has been sitting for a couple months. It's just a monstrosity amount of inventory that we're sitting on it.
The pileup started back in January, when China banned the import of 24 different types of paper and plastic, including things like reusable water bottles. China also changed its requirements for the recyclables it still accepts. It only wants higher-grade clean stuff that's almost perfectly sorted.
The rate that China is now mandating is 0.5% contamination. Is that even possible?
In my opinion, it's not. We never thought it would come to the point that it's come to. We wouldn't have put all the infrastructure and money into the facility if we had.
Is stuff still coming in faster than you can get it out?
Yeah, right now.
How much has it affected your business?
Millions, yeah. I mean, it's a big number.
Harvey isn't alone. Shipments of American recyclables to China were down by 36% through April of this year. Waste Dive, an industry publication, estimates that drop-off has impacted recycling programs in at least 27 states.
Don't get me started. We're offering them to everybody, but that's the challenge.
Jonathan Sloan is a broker. He buys recyclables from people like Harvey and then sends them to countries around the world. And China's new policy has made that work a lot harder.
I've seen lots of bad markets in the 30 years I've been doing this, but I've never seen anything like this. It's had a dramatic impact on the entire industry, east to west, north to south.
What's changed in the marketplace as a result of this decision?
Price has been dramatically reduced on things like mixed paper. 2 years ago, getting $75, $85 a ton for your mixed paper to being charged in a lot of cases to take it away.
So you have to pay now for someone to take something that they used
to get paid
to pay you for?
Right. That has totally upended the economics of a lot of recycling programs.
U.S. recyclers haven't just had to take whatever price they can get. They've also had to scramble to find new buyers. In the first 4 months of the year, recyclable paper and plastic exports to India, Indonesia, Taiwan, and Vietnam have all more than doubled. With all this material going to ports that it wasn't going to before, how's it affecting those ports? I mean, are these countries able to accept that much stuff?
We've seen, just over the last week or so, Vietnam enact restrictions because they just don't physically have the capacity to handle all those containers that have come into those ports.
If China doesn't come back, if we can't find places to send our recyclable waste, what happens?
Well, I think the worst case scenario is programs stop.
Meaning we stop recycling?
That's sort of the worst case scenario.
At the moment, some states are already giving companies waivers to throw out recyclables. It's happening in more than a dozen states, including Massachusetts, where more than 4,000 tons of paper and plastic recyclables and more than 10,000 tons of glass have been sent to landfills.
Have you gotten waivers to throw any of this stuff out?
No.
Have you thought about applying for them?
At some point, if we're forced into it, maybe. I don't think that will come. I hope it doesn't, but there's no secret. I mean, we need China. No question.
China isn't the first developing country to leave these bottom feeder businesses behind, and it won't be the last, which is a good thing for the global economy, but it will continue to have huge ramifications for how we live on this planet.
Recycling's not as easy as people think, that, you throw it into this big bin and it, magically turns into something that's super valuable. And now people can see, like, okay, this is what happens when you rely on another country and they decide that they don't want your stuff anymore.
More than 27,000 people applied for a lottery to attend Stephen Hawking's interment service at Westminster Abbey in London last Friday. 1,000 people from over 100 countries got their wish, including me, William Turton, Hawking lottery winner and two-time reader of A Brief History of Time.
We come to celebrate the life and achievements of Stephen Hawking.
So you came here from Tunisia, no problem?
Yeah, no problem. Of course, for Stephen Hawking, I would do it. I mean, it's an amazing event.
When you told people you would go to London for the service, like your friends and family, what was their reaction?
Well, I would start with the reaction of my wife. Why would you do that? I mean, he's not a close family member. I told her, it's just like a rock star,
This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience to pay tribute as kind of a commoner, so to speak, to someone that profound that had such a large impact on the world.
And you brought students here from America, right?
I did. I brought 4 students with me, specifically because one of them, since he was 5-ish, was interested in quantum mechanics and black holes and anything relating to cosmology and Stephen Hawking. And so I knew that I was going to apply for this for that student.
Hawking was a celebrity scientist in a class with Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye. He said that just as many people knew him from his appearances on The Simpsons as from his scientific breakthroughs.
If you are looking for trouble, you found it.
Yeah, just try me, you.
For many, Hawking was their only exposure to the complicated and esoteric science of modern physics.
A brief history of time, it was the universe and time and space in a nutshell. It was kind of an eye-opening entry into the works of Feynman and Carl Sagan and a lot of the other great science communicators that were able to relate it to everybody.
Inside the historic English church, famous actors and members of parliament celebrated Hawking's life.
Stephen William Hawking inspires us by his joyous life, by his courage, his stubbornness, and his challenging questions for scientists of today and of the future.
Hawking had a gift for delighting nerds. In the past, as part of a running joke about time travel, he'd sent invitations to an event after it had taken place, hoping time travelers would show up. This event was no different. Can you explain what did the invitation say?
They asked your date of birth, and they allowed you to scroll into the future to choose your date of birth if you chose to.
And you were not one of the time travelers?
I couldn't tell you if I was.